These are 20 hidden facts about Laramie, the NBC Western that ran from 1959 to 1963. A show that aired in more than 70 countries, reshaped the look of American television for over a decade, and quietly launched some of the most consequential careers in Hollywood history, while most television historians barely gave it a second glance. If you grew up watching Westerns, you probably know the broad outline already. Two brothers run a stagecoach relay station outside of Laramie, Wyoming. In the years following the Civil War, a drifter named Jess Harper rides in, earns his keep, and becomes family. Trouble shows up every Tuesday night at 7:30, 4 seasons of it, 124 episodes, and then NBC cancels the whole thing in 1963. That is more or less what the history books give you, when they bother to give you anything at all. What those histories consistently skip over is where the real story lives. It lives in casting decisions that nearly went the other way, in a writer's room that was secretly shaping the future of science fiction television, in a producer who had unknowingly written the source material for one of cinema's great comedies, and in the personal lives of actors whose off-screen experiences were far more dramatic than anything that ever aired on a Tuesday night. 20 facts, all of them verified, most of them buried deep enough that even dedicated fans of the show have never come across them. Let's start at the beginning. Fact number 1. The two stars almost played each other's characters. Going into screen tests at Revue Studios in the summer of 1959, the casting plan was perfectly clear. John Smith would play Jess Harper, the hot-tempered Texan drifter, and Robert Fuller would play Slim Sherman, the responsible ranch-owning older brother. That was the assignment. It lasted about a week. After reading through the scripts, Fuller pushed back hard, convinced that Jess was his role, a morally complicated outsider, carrying a violent past and an anger that could ignite without warning. The producers agreed to run new screen tests with both men in both parts, and the results confirmed everything Fuller had argued. Fuller became Jess Harper, and John Smith became Slim Sherman, and that small production argument ended up determining the entire character of the show. What made this more than a minor personnel shuffle was the nature of what was being swapped. These were the two central figures around which every single episode would be constructed, and the dynamic between them, the friction between Slim's restraint and Jess's temper, the tension between the man who belongs to a place and the man who is always one bad day away from riding out, depended entirely on which actor carried which role. At 6'3", with a broad-shouldered, unhurried presence that made audiences instinctively trust him, Smith fit Slim in a way that could not have been manufactured. Fuller, lean and coiled with a restless energy the camera caught instantly, was always going to be Jess. They got it exactly right, but the show came within a single round of screen tests of existing as something else entirely. Fact number 2. The pilot was secretly filmed in color. This is a fact that still trips up dedicated Laramie fans, and one that IMDb lists incorrectly to this day. Seasons 1 and 2 aired in black and white, 64 episodes running from the September 1959 premiere through the June 1961 Season 2 finale. Every single one of them in black and white, with one exception nobody noticed at the time. The pilot, Stage Stop, the episode that introduced the Sherman Ranch, Jess Harper arriving on horseback, and the entire world of the series, was filmed in color. Revue Studios had already begun transitioning its production infrastructure toward color filming, anticipating the network's eventual full switchover, and the pilot went through under those updated conditions. NBC, though, was not yet broadcasting Tuesday night drama in full color, so Stage Stop went out to American living rooms in grayscale and stayed there through years of reruns and syndication, with nobody the wiser. The surviving print carries the original Color Lab credit, which is the confirmation. Every home video release and every streaming version of Stage Stop currently available is a black and white telescene of a color film, meaning the reds and browns of the Wyoming landscape, the blue of the sky over the Sherman Ranch. All of it was sitting in the original footage while audiences watched a gray version for years. It is a precise snapshot of the transition era of American television, when the industry was running two technical realities simultaneously, and the gap between them was invisible to the people watching at home. Fact number 3. Neither star was born with the name you know. Both lead actors showed up to the Laramie set carrying names that other people had invented for them, and the stories behind those names run in completely different directions. Leonard Leroy Lee came into the world on July 29, 1933, in Troy, New York, and before his acting career found traction, he took his stepfather's surname, becoming Robert Simpson Jr. That name proved insufficient for the marquee, and he eventually settled on Robert Fuller, clean and American, and just distinctive enough to lodge in the memory without demanding attention. John Smith's situation was more deliberately engineered. and the engineer was Henry Wilson, one of the most powerful and most controversial talent agents in Hollywood history. Born Robert Errol Van Orden in Los Angeles on March 6, 1931, Smith came to Wilson's attention while building his early career, and Wilson gave him the name John Smith. The logic was counterintuitive and exactly right. In a business full of exotic surnames and manufactured glamour, Wilson had calculated that the most ordinary name in the English language would be the one nobody could forget. He had already applied the same principle elsewhere. Roy Scherer became Rock Hudson under Wilson's guidance. Arthur Andrew Kelm became Tab Hunter. And Robert Van Orden became John Smith, the only one by that name in Hollywood for a brief window in the early 1960s, which meant every casting director in town knew precisely who you were talking about the moment you said it. Fact number 4. Hoagy Carmichael wrote an original song specifically for the show. Season 1 put Hoagy Carmichael in a battered hat and a kitchen apron as Jonesy, the Sherman Ranch's wisecracking cook and handyman, and what that casting also brought to the production was the most decorated popular songwriter of his generation. The composer of Stardust, Georgia on My Mind, and Heart and Soul, the man who had won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1951 for In the Cool 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 of the Evening, showed up to play a television ranch hand, and the producers were not about to let that talent sit idle in a kitchen. For the Season 1 episode Glory Road, Carmichael composed an original piece called Marry Me in Laramie, with lyrics by Bill Olafson and music that carried his signature warmth, melodically generous and built to stick after a single hearing. No commercial single followed. No promotional push outside the episode itself. The song existed entirely within the context of one Tuesday night western and then essentially vanished from the record, which means a genuine Hoagy Carmichael original commissioned specifically for this show has been sitting in the archives for over 60 years without attracting much notice. For anyone serious about the full range of what Carmichael produced across his career, and he was extraordinarily prolific, Marry Me in Laramie is a small discovery that nobody has gotten around to making yet. Fact number 5. Why Hoagy Carmichael left the show is actually disputed. The standard version of why Carmichael only appeared in Season 1 is satisfying enough that most people stopped there. He preferred playing golf in Palm Springs to driving to Universal City every morning, so he quit. Robert Fuller told this version in his own words during an interview with Western Clippings, describing Carmichael as a man who had simply had enough of the commute and the early calls and would rather be outside in the morning air. Richard M. Sudhalter's biography of Carmichael, published by Oxford University Press in 2003 under the title Stardust Melody, tells the story differently. On page 303, Sudhalter states that NBC chose not to renew Carmichael's contract, making the decision a network call rather than a personal one. Both accounts are in print. Both come from credible sources. Nobody currently knows with certainty which version reflects what actually happened, and anyone who claims otherwise is working from incomplete information. What nobody disputes is what the departure set in motion. The producers rebuilt around the gap by adding Spring Byington as a matronly housekeeper named Daisy Cooper and Dennis Holmes as a young orphan boy named Mike Williams, restoring the surrogate family texture that Jonesy had anchored, just in a different configuration. Whether Carmichael left of his own accord or was not invited back, the show that emerged in Season 3 was a noticeably different production than the one he had inhabited. Fact number 6. One of the show's writers created Can, The Klingons, and The Prime Directive. Gene L. Kuhn contributed multiple scripts to Laramie in the late 1950s and early 1960s, working as one of the reliable professional writers the television production system of that era depended on. Westerns, crime dramas, adventure series, Kuhn moved through them all as a craftsman who was fast and technically accomplished, finished his Laramie scripts and moved on. Nobody on the Sherman Ranch had any particular reason to track where he went next. A few years later, Kuhn became the showrunner of Star Trek's second season, and in that role he rebuilt the franchise's identity from the inside. Space Seed, the episode that introduced Khan Noonien Singh, came from his typewriter. The Klingons were his creation. The Prime Directive, the foundational ethical principle of the entire Star Trek universe, originated with Kuhn. Devil in the Dark and a piece of the action were his. The philosophical architecture that gave Star Trek its weight as something more than space adventure was built largely by a man who had recently been writing scripts for a Wyoming stagecoach station. Even dedicated Star Trek historians rarely mention the Laramie years, which is part of what makes the connection worth stating clearly. The pipeline from Laramie's writer's room to the bridge of the Enterprise is real and documented, and it is exactly the kind of unexpected lineage that only surfaces when you start looking closely at where people came from before they became famous for something else. And if that connection between a forgotten Western and one of the greatest science fiction franchises of all time surprised you, hit that subscribe button right now because we are just getting started, and it only gets stranger from here. Fact number 7. The show's producer also made the film that became Airplane. John C. Champion ran Laramie as its executive producer from the first episode to the last, writing 15 scripts himself and functioning as the creative driver of the entire 4-season run. Before all of that, in 1957, Champion produced and co-wrote a taut aviation thriller called 0 Hour, a serious dramatic film about a traumatized former combat pilot forced to land a commercial aircraft after the crew is incapacitated. Dana Andrews starred and Linda Darnell co-starred. Arthur Haley's television play provided the source material, and the film was taken seriously at the time. In 1980, Jerry Zucker, Jim Abrahams, and David Zucker made Airplane, one of the most successful comedies ever produced, by parodying Champion's film almost line for line. Entire scenes from 0 Hour were reproduced with comedic substitutions, and lines of dialogue from Champion's production reappear nearly verbatim in Airplane. The structural skeleton of the comedy is Champion's original dramatic film. Champion died in October of 1994 in Tarzana, California, at the age of 70, having overseen 124 episodes of a major network western, and having unknowingly written the source material for a comedy that generations of filmgoers can quote from memory. Both things sit in the same biography, and accounting for that combination in any reasonable way is genuinely difficult. Fact number 8. The NBC Peacock you grew up with debuted before a Laramie broadcast. On January 2, 1962, NBC unveiled a redesigned version of its living color peacock logo, a cleaner and more graphically confident bird than the one that had been appearing before color broadcasts since the mid-50s. This new peacock was the version that endured, the one that became so embedded in American visual culture that an entire generation associates it not just with NBC but with the idea of color television itself, and the place where it appeared for the first time on air was before that evening's broadcast of Laramie. Network staff called it the Laramie Peacock internally for exactly that reason. From January of 1962 through 1975, 13 full years of NBC broadcasting. Every program that opened with that peacock did so under a logo whose public debut had been tied to a Tuesday night western. Everything in that 13-year span, the moon landing coverage, the early Carson years, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, the first season of Saturday Night Live, was preceded by the same bird that first spread its feathers before an episode about a stagecoach relay station in Wyoming. That connection lives in the footnotes of television history, which is more or less where all of the best connections tend to hide. Fact number 9. The show's theme music had already been in a movie. Cyril J. Mockridge composed the Laramie theme, a melody that established the show's tone within the first few bars, that combination of open landscape and forward momentum that defined the sound of the American Western in the television era. What the millions of viewers who heard that theme across 4 seasons had no way of knowing was that Mockridge had already used it once before. The melody opening every Laramie episode had previously served as the principal theme of Thunderhead, Son of Flicka, a 1945 20th Century Fox film about a horse, specifically a sequel to the 1943 My Friend Flicka. Composers in that era worked on studio contracts. Studios owned the rights to what those composers produced, and the same musical material could travel across multiple productions without any announcement being required. The recycling was standard practice. What is not standard is the particular texture of that fact. The musical identity of a show about a Wyoming stagecoach station had originally belonged to a boy and his horse story from the final months of World War II. Every time the Laramie theme played across American living rooms, audiences were hearing a melody that had previously belonged to a completely different film, made 14 years earlier, attached to a completely different story. Fact number 10. The boy who played Slim's brother was the real-life older brother of the rifleman's son. Robert L. Crawford Jr. played Andy Sherman, Slim's young brother, across Season 1 and a handful of early Season 2 episodes, providing the emotional core of the Sherman household and a concrete reason for the ranch to feel like a home rather than just a business. Most viewers watching had no idea Crawford Jr. was not a conventional child actor, Before Laramie, Crawford had earned an Emmy nomination for Best Single Performance by an Actor for his work on Playhouse 90, one of the most prestigious dramatic anthology programs in early American television, making him a genuinely accomplished performer with serious credentials going into the Western role. And his younger brother was Johnny Crawford, who at that same moment was appearing on ABC as Mark McCain, the son of Chuck Connor's character on The Rifleman. During a specific window in 1959 and early 1960, two brothers from the same Los Angeles family were playing the younger generation of two separate fictional Western households on two separate networks at the same time. Robert on NBC as Andy Sherman and Johnny on ABC as Mark McCain, neither character aware of the other's existence and neither audience given any reason to connect the two. Crawford Jr. eventually left acting in his 20s and moved into film production, working as associate producer on The Sting in 1973 and later contributing to The World According to Garp. His television career was brief, but Laramie was where it started. And if you are enjoying these stories from behind the scenes of one of television's most underrated westerns, please take a second to like this video and leave a comment below, because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love classic television. Fact number 11. Robert Fuller was met by tens of thousands of fans in Tokyo. When Laramie reached Japanese television in 1961, the response had no equivalent in the domestic American market. The series became one of the most watched American programs ever broadcast in Japan, with a reported audience share of around 43%, a figure that circulates widely but cannot be traced to a primary Japanese ratings document, making it a strong approximation rather than a confirmed statistic. The lying Yuknori disputes is what was waiting for Fuller at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Secondary sources have consistently placed the crowd at 100,000 people. Fuller himself, in more recent accounts, has put the figure closer to 25,000. The gap between those two numbers is not a small one, and the honest position is that neither count has been independently verified. Even at 25,000, though, the image carries its own weight. Tens of thousands of people crowding an international airport for the man who played Jess Harper, a fictional Texan drifter who had become a genuine cultural phenomenon on the other side of the Pacific without anyone on the American production side having planned for it. During that same visit, Fuller had dinner with Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda and received the Japanese Order of Merit, reported at the time as the first American actor to be awarded it. Jess Harper had traveled about as far from a Wyoming stagecoach station as a fictional character could go, and the reception in Tokyo had nothing in common with the modest ratings Laramie was pulling back home. Fact number 12. John Smith introduced Robert Fuller to Julie London, and they all ended up on the same show a decade later. Season 2 of Laramie opened on September 20, 1960, with an episode called Queen of Diamonds and a guest star named Julie London, singer, actress, and one of the most compelling performers working in either medium at that moment. On that set, Smith introduced London to Fuller, and the friendship that followed lasted the rest of London's life, through to her death in the year 2000. What makes the introduction worth tracking is the chain it started. In 1972, Jack Webb launched Emergency, a drama following the Los Angeles County Fire Department's paramedic program, and Fuller was cast as Dr. Kelly Brackett, while London was cast as Nurse Dixie McCall. The two worked together on Emergency for 6 seasons, from 1972 through 1977, reaching an entirely new generation of viewers who had no way of knowing that the professional relationship on screen had started on a Laramie soundstage 12 years earlier. Smith himself appeared in a 2-part guest role on Emergency in 1972, playing a fire captain, though he turned down a standing offer to join as a series regular. The three of them, Smith, Fuller, and London, had built something genuine during the Laramie years, and what happened afterward, across 2 different series and 2 different decades, grew directly out of what started on a Tuesday night in 1960, on a set in Universal City. Fact number 13. In Germany, the show had a completely different name that makes no geographic sense. When Laramie reached the German-speaking market, the distributors decided the original title needed replacing. The show aired in Germany as Am Fuß der Blauen Berge, which translates to At the Foot of the Blue Mountains. The Blue Mountains exist in North America. They run through northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington state, rising to roughly 9,000 feet at their highest point, and they are genuinely impressive terrain. What they are not is anywhere near Laramie, Wyoming. 600 miles separates the two locations, with entirely different states in between, and no meaningful geographic relationship connects them. Why the German distributors made this choice is not recorded in any available source. Maybe At the Foot of the Blue Mountains carried a romantic quality for German audiences that a single Wyoming place name could not match. Maybe a pre-existing cultural association between Blue Mountains and the American West made the substitution feel natural in a way that does not survive translation into English. Maybe nobody checked a map. Whatever the explanation, German audiences spent 4 years watching a show set firmly in Laramie, Wyoming, under a title placing it 600 miles away in a different part of the continent entirely, and apparently nobody in the production pipeline stopped to question it at any point. Fact number 14. The entire comic book run was only 4 issues. Dell Comics dominated the television tie-in market during the Western boom, publishing comics alongside Gunsmoke, Have Gun Will Travel, The Lone Ranger, Maverick, and most of the other major network westerns of the late 1950s and early 60s. If a show was on the air and pulling an audience, Dell was almost certainly publishing something to accompany it. Laramie got the Dell treatment too, just not much of it. The complete run totals 4 issues, 3 released within Dell's 4-color anthology series, cataloged internally as numbers 1125, 1235, and 1284, plus 1 standalone issue published as Laramie No. 4. Photo covers featured Smith and Fuller. Jack Sparling handled the interior artwork, and the original cover price was 15 cents per issue. 4 issues, start to finish. Bonanza, which premiered one day after Laramie and drew from the same audience demographic, eventually accumulated 96 issues across its Dell and Gold Key run. Laramie's 4 issues place it among the smallest tie-in comics runs of any major network western from that era, which means the complete set costs exactly 60 cents at original retail prices and not much more than that today. Short enough that being an incomplete collector is almost harder than being a complete one. Fact number 15. John Wayne tried to make John Smith a film star, and a director reportedly stopped it. When Laramie wrapped its final season in 1963, Smith carried 4 years of leading man experience on a major network series and a physical presence, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding, that should have translated naturally to the movie screen. John Wayne agreed, and Wayne personally pushed director Henry Hathaway to cast Smith as Steve McCabe in Circus World, a large-scale 1964 production with Wayne himself at the top of the bill. Personal advocacy from John Wayne carried real weight in that industry, and there was no obvious reason it should not have worked. What followed is documented without a clear explanation. Hathaway developed an intense personal dislike of Smith, the reasons for which were never publicly stated, and according to the biographical record, Hathaway then used his influence to actively discourage other directors and producers from working with Smith going forward. The impact was almost immediate. Smith's film career, which Wayne's backing had positioned to accelerate, stalled instead, and then effectively ended. Sporadic work followed through the 1960s and 70s, but nothing approached the visibility of the Laramie years. Fuller, by contrast, moved directly from Laramie to a leading role on Wagon Train, then ran 6 seasons on Emergency. The gap between where Smith's career should have gone and where it actually went remains one of the quietly unresolved stories of that television era, and it appears to have turned entirely on a personality conflict with a single director who was working with John Wayne at exactly the wrong moment. Fact number 16. There may have been a secret audition to replace John Smith in a 5th season. On February 5, 1963, Laramie aired a Season 4 episode called No Place to Run, featuring 2 guest characters in prominent roles, Gandy Ross, played by Don Durant, and Wellman, played by Arch Johnson. Both performances were notably strong, and both men gave the episode a different kind of energy than typical guest casting. The Classic TV Archive has stated that Durant was being positioned as a potential replacement for Smith in a 5th season, arguing that No Place to Run functioned as a backdoor pilot for a reconfigured show where a new character would have stepped into Slim Sherman's place alongside Jess Harper. Mary Brown of Festival of the West, who maintained a personal relationship with producer John C. Champion, relayed Champion's own denial. The replacement story was not true. Smith had already signed a lucrative contract with Review Studios, and Champion had no intention of continuing the show without both leads. Both accounts are in the record, and both come from parties with direct knowledge of the situation. Preliminary conversations about reconfiguring the show may have happened at a production level below Champion's direct involvement, or the episode's casting may have been simply strong casting with no strategic intent behind it, and the rest is legend that grew up afterward. What is not in dispute is the outcome. A 5th season never materialized. NBC canceled the series at the end of Season 4, and the question of whether Smith's replacement had been planned became irrelevant on May 21, 1963. Fact number 17. By season 4, the show was essentially two solo vehicles stitched together. Through the first 2 seasons, Laramie ran as a genuine ensemble, with Slim and Jess sharing screen time in relatively balanced ways across most episodes. The dynamic between them, the restraint of one against the temper of the other, was the engine of the show, and it needed both men in the same scenes to generate the friction it depended on. By season 4, that had changed in a way the producers made explicit. Individual episodes were announced to audiences as Tonight starring John Smith, or Tonight starring Robert Fuller, a practice that openly signaled a solo vehicle rather than the joint enterprise the show had been in its earlier years. Many fourth-season episodes were effectively standalone stories for one lead, with the other present in a limited capacity, enough to maintain continuity, but not enough to constitute genuine co-starring. Long-running ensemble series drift this direction for any number of practical reasons: scheduling pressures, promotional obligations, the shifting preferences of the writer's room, and whatever drove the change in Laramie's case. The show that ended in May of 1963 was a structurally different object than the one that premiered in September of 1959. The friction between Slim Sherman and Jess Harper, the quality that had driven 124 episodes, had been redistributed across separate stories rather than concentrated within the same scenes, and the difference between those two things is not a small one. Fact number 18. The show's most consistent supporting player is almost never mentioned. Ask any Laramie fan to name the regular cast, and you get John Smith, Robert Fuller, Hoagie Carmichael, Spring Byington, Robert Crawford Jr., Dennis Holmes. Ask them to keep going, and most of them go quiet. Almost nobody mentions Eddie Waller. Mose Shell, the stagecoach driver Waller played across the entire run of the show, was not a glamorous character. No dramatic confrontations, no romantic storylines, no single episode built around his arc. Mose was there to drive the stage, deliver exposition, and give the show the particular texture of working Western life that kept it grounded, and Waller brought to that role the unhurried authority of a man who had seen everything twice and found none of it surprising. More to the point, Waller appeared in all 4 seasons of Laramie, which makes the complete list of cast members who stayed with the show from the September 1959 premiere through the May 1963 finale: John Smith, Robert Fuller, and Eddie Waller. Carmichael left after season 1. Byington and Holmes arrived in season 3. Waller was there the whole time, working quietly in the margins of episodes where nobody was paying particular attention to him. He died in August of 1977, at the age of 88, from a stroke, after accumulating more than 250 production credits across a career stretching back to the early 1930s. Laramie was the final major chapter of a very long story. Fact number 19. The stunt team included a man who would later direct Smokey and the Bandit. Laramie's stunt community reads, in retrospect, like a catalog of the people who built the physical language of American cinema and television across the post-war decades. Chuck Roberson, John Wayne's regular stunt double, performed on the show. Paul Baxley, who went on to coordinate stunts on major film productions for the next 30 years, worked those episodes. Ronnie Rondell, from a stunt dynasty that shaped the craft across multiple generations, was part of the team. And Hal Needham was there too. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Needham was doing what everyone else on that list was doing: falling off horses, absorbing punches, crashing wagons, and performing the physical work that turned action sequences from written pages into filmed reality. Television westerns were where a significant portion of the era's stunt vocabulary was developed, and the Sherman Ranch was one of the places it happened. 1977 brought Needham's directorial debut with Smokey and the Bandit, one of the year's highest-grossing films and a cornerstone of Burt Reynolds' commercial career. Hooper and the Cannonball Run films followed, establishing Needham as among the first stuntmen to successfully cross into directing. The path from a Laramie episode to the set of Smokey and the Bandit is not short or obvious, but it is a real one, built across years of physical craft on sets that included the Sherman Ranch. Fact number 20. John Smith's personal life contained a tragedy that stayed with him his entire life. This last fact deserves to be treated with the weight it carries, and it will be. Robert Errol Van Orden, the man who became John Smith, was 6 years old when he accidentally shot and killed his older sister Laura. Multiple biographical sources carry this as part of his documented record. He was a child and it was an accident, and nothing in the record suggests otherwise. What the record cannot measure is what that experience cost him across the decades that followed. Smith married actress Luana Patton in the early 1960s, and they divorced in 1964. He never remarried. His film career, positioned to accelerate after Laramie, was effectively blocked by circumstances already described in this video. Work came sporadically through the following decades, but nothing matched what he had built as Slim Sherman. On January 25, 1995, Smith died in Los Angeles at the age of 63, from cirrhosis of the liver combined with heart problems. His ashes were scattered at sea. His most famous role was Slim Sherman, on a show that has sat largely outside the mainstream cultural conversation for 60 years, and every account from people who knew him describes a man who showed up fully, took the work seriously, and treated the people around him with genuine warmth. Robert Fuller spoke about that friendship in terms that left no doubt it was among the most important of his life. A closeness running from the first Laramie screen test to the last day Smith was alive. Whatever John Smith carried, and the record suggests he carried something real, none of it appeared on screen. What appeared on screen was a man completely at ease in his own presence, projecting a quiet authority that required no announcement. At the level of craft, that is no small thing. Those are the 20 facts the standard history of Laramie tends to leave out, and taken together, they describe something considerably more layered than the show's surface suggests. To pilot filmed in color that nobody watched in color for years. 2 stars who nearly played each other's roles. A producer who wrote the template for Airplane without knowing it. A writer who created the Klingons after finishing his Western scripts. A logo that defined NBC's visual identity for 13 years. A theme borrowed from a horse movie made 14 years earlier. A crowd of tens of thousands at a Tokyo airport. A stunt performer who became a director. 3 actors whose connection ran through 2 decades and 2 subsequent series. A man carrying something heavy for his entire life while projecting nothing but steadiness on screen. Underneath all of it, 2 men, Robert Errol Van Orden and Leonard Leroy Lee, renamed by Hollywood and pointed at a camera in the summer of 1959, who built something that lasted 4 seasons, 124 episodes, more than 70 countries, and the better part of a lifetime friendship. Laramie never held the critical spotlight. Somewhere between 30 and 40 other westerns pulled more column inches in the entertainment press of that era, and the show never won Emmys. But as a production, it holds up under examination in exactly the way that the shows everyone already talks about are supposed to. Every layer pulled back reveals another one underneath, and the people involved were considerably more interesting than the story you thought you already had. If this sent you back to watch an episode, or if you carry facts about this show that did not make it into this video, drop them in the comments below. There are at least 20 more where these came from, and some of them are even stranger.